Welcome back to the podcast. I am going to be talking today about something that has come up on a lot of the calls that I've had recently with the parents that I work with, and that is that they have a different approach to parenting than their partner or spouse or co-parent has. So many of the parents I've worked with in the past come from a divorced relationship where their teenager is spending time with them and then also spending time with their other parent somewhere else. And they are frustrated because the other parent in the situation has different ideas on how to approach things and is either involved and has really intense rules where they don't have rules or has not enough rules in their opinion. And this can be really challenging because it really feels like they don't have control over half of what happens in their teenager's life. And they really are wanting to instill a sense of values into their teen, but for like half of the time, they feel like they don't really have a say. And so it's really frustrating for them. And I've coached a lot of my clients around this situation. So I thought it might be about time to do a podcast on this. And like I said, a lot of this comes down to a lack of control and also the fact that your teenager is in that period of time where they are nearing potentially leaving the house and being an adult. And so there's like a lot of this pressure to get it all figured out and to make sure that they learn what they need to learn. At the same time, teenagers are testing limits at this period, maybe acting out or breaking the rules. And one parent does really well with follow through, the other parent maybe not. And there just can be a really big disconnect, and it's hard to hold your teenager accountable when the other parent isn't necessarily enforcing the same rules. So this can also come up, and it has come up on my calls with parents who aren't divorced, but just have different approaches or viewpoints on parenting. So whether their expectations are different or the way they like to enforce consequences are different, it can really cause tension in the relationship in a married couple as well. So when I'm talking about this, it could apply to whether you are in a divorce situation or you're co-parenting or you are still married and just parenting with somebody who has a different thought about how to approach parenting. So I'm going to be sharing with you 8 different tips on what to do in these situations. And many of these tips maybe you've heard before. I recommend setting your frustration aside for a moment and just focusing on the outcome that you're after. And my guess is if you're here listening to this podcast, the outcome that you're after is to have a good relationship with your teenager and to help really raise them to be a responsible, resilient, independent adult. And this is a frustration that is getting in the way of that relationship or that development. See if you can set that frustration aside for just a bit and hear these tips with fresh eyes. And remember that your ability to focus in on these 8 things could really impact your relationship with your teenager, potentially your relationship with your co-parenting partner or ex or spouse, so that there's a little more harmony in the relationship and a little bit less resentment. So let's go ahead and dive into the 8 tips. You know me, I like to keep it short and sweet, right to the point. So tip number 1 is try not to judge. And I know that this is probably one of the hardest things to do as a person, as a parent, as a co-parent. Try not to judge what you are seeing on the other side. I've had conversations with parents who are no longer living with their ex, and they know what's going on in their ex's house. They have no control over what's going on, and it is complete opposite of what they value as a person. And the frustration that they have and the judgment that they have is something that we really work on together, because that judgment is getting in the way of them having a relationship with their teenager. And of course, they're coming to me because they want to have a good relationship with their teenager. So as much as you can, set the judgment aside. Try to avoid criticizing them And do what you can to not try to control what's going on over there. What's going on when your teenager's at their house, especially talking badly about them in front of your teen, criticizing them in front of your teen. Let those frustrations out somewhere else. Find another place where you can express your frustrations and let them go as much as you can, setting that judgment aside. And then what I would recommend as instead of judging is to double down on your parenting approach. Double down on the values that you really want to instill in your teenager and really keep the focus on what you can control in this situation. So setting the judgment aside is tip number 1. Tip number 2 is to try to think about what the other parent is doing right. So often our brains want to go to what's not working, or the frustration leads us to only see the things that we don't like. But if you're able to at least shift to the things that you see that you do like, or that are at least somewhat neutral, it will impact your energy around the situation. And it can even just be small things like they have food in the refrigerator, or they provide clothing and transportation for their child. It doesn't have to be really big things. In fact, the more you can focus on the smaller things, the better. Because there probably are more small things that you could be appreciative of than there are really big things that frustrate you. So yes, those frustrations are going to be there, but the small things just kind of shift your attention to, well, I'm grateful for this part, this effort, these things. So just compartmentalizing a little bit. And if anything, it's going to help with your frame of mind. It's going to change the way you behave when you're with your teenager, and it's also going to impact the way you feel so that you're not carrying that heavy burden and frustration all of the time, because it's not healthy for you. Number 3 is to see if you and the other parent can come together on the important things. You may not agree on everything, and no parent or parent team is going to agree on everything. It's just, there's going to be disagreements, and that's okay. But come together on the important things as much as possible. Things like school, grades, screen time, behavior, of course, safety, and also, if at all possible, the consequences of breaking the rules, crossing boundaries, keeping that consistent as much as possible, and communication between the two of you about big things. So, like I said, rule breaking or grades in school, see where you can come together on those big things and at least find a middle ground where you're in agreement on how to handle them as much as possible. Number 4 is to model respect. So I know that you may not agree with, or you may be frustrated with this other person, but it's important that you show your teenager that even if we disagree with someone, even if we have conflict with someone, we can still model respect for that person. And sometimes respect means just not saying anything at all. Respect doesn't have to mean praising them or talking only good, positive things about them, speaking only positively about them. It can just mean, I'm going to hold my tongue. When I really want to say something, I'm going to hold back and I'm not going to say something, because I want to model to my teenager how a respectful adult handles situations. And do your best to keep your cool. And like I said, have an outlet somewhere where that frustration doesn't have to get built up, where you can let it out, where you can talk it out, where you can move, you can join a boxing gym. Get your frustrations out somewhere so that you are not getting them out in front of your kids. Number 5 is to maintain boundaries. So this can be boundaries with the rules that you have in place, the consequences and expectations you have in place with your teen. So being consistent with that, but maintaining boundaries on what is and is not okay with this other parent that you're co-parenting with. what is and is not okay with you as far as that is going, and making sure that you're sticking with any pre-arranged agreements that you had with them about things that you will and won't allow. That consistency will be helpful for your teenager. And if the relationship with your ex is really tense or it's filled with a lot of conflict, there are ways to parent to reduce the conflict, like parallel parenting, where you're not talking as much, you're not in connection with each other as much, totally separate, to at least be able to protect your child so they're not around the conflict all of the time. So hold your boundaries. And I've also had clients who have rules in place that they agreed upon long ago when they got divorced on when the kids were going to be where. And sometimes once the teenager starts to drive, that can be a little bit muddied. Because if your teenager really prefers to be at your house and they're supposed to be at your ex's house, it can be a little bit tricky when they're actually able to drive themselves and come over. But sometimes it's important to keep those boundaries. Like, this is your weekend with this person. You're not supposed to be at my house. Keeping those boundaries with love and respect for yourself and respect for your ex as well. And also just to reduce any unnecessary conflict with your ex. Number 6 is to remember that your teenager is going to be able to adapt to differing expectations. So yes, it would be a wonderful situation if everybody really knew the rules, everybody agreed on the values, everybody was on the same page. But if that's not the situation, whether you're married still or not, it's really important to know that kids are adaptable. They know what they're going to get with different people. Just like when they're at school, they have different teachers. They know one teacher is going to allow these things and another teacher might not. But that doesn't mean that they don't know how to switch gears and follow the rules in each classroom. It's the same thing with you in your house and when your teenager is not in your house. Being able to honor and respect whatever the expectations are at that house. Know that it's okay and your teenager will adapt. Number 7 is to let your teenager work out their problems that they're having with the other parent. So like I said, if this is an ex, if it's a co-parent, if it's your spouse, if your teenager is having conflicts with that other person, it's not your job to go in there and be a mediator. If anything, it's better if you don't. If you don't get involved at all. Let them have the conversation with that person and resolve the conflict on their own. That doesn't mean that you can't act as a sounding board and listen if your teenager wants to ask for your advice or vent to you, but that just means you're not getting in the middle of it. You're not going to the other parent and saying, hey, our son here is really upset because you were really strict on him. No, you're putting the ball in your teenager's court and you're teaching your teen how to advocate and have hard conversations without you being there as a mediator. And also, if you get in there and you start mediating, it could be a 2-on-1 situation where two people feel one person feels ganged up on. And you're just not wanting to do that. So let your teenager speak for themselves and try not to get in the middle. Unless, of course, it has something to do with like a big issue, like a safety issue or something like that. Of course, get involved when it has to do with the well-being of your child. But if it's just a, disagreement or a frustration, let them handle it with the other parent without getting involved. And I know it's really hard to do, especially I've worked with a lot of parents, moms especially, who want to protect their teenager and stand up for them. But then it just causes a big old mess and a big old conflict, and you don't need to be involved in that. In fact, it's better to teach your kid how to stand up for themselves instead of being the person who goes to bat for them all the time. And tip number 8 is to ask yourself what you could do to be a better parent. You cannot make that person a different kind of parent, If you're still married, you may be able to influence them. If you're not married, maybe you still can influence them. But instead of trying to change something else, really put your efforts in on being a better parent yourself. So look at the areas where you could grow. Look at the areas where you'd like to be better. And also celebrate the areas where you feel like things are going well. No parent is perfect, but of course, you can always look at ways to improve. There's always a better way to approach things. There's always something that you could do to be a little more supportive and connected with your teenager. So instead of turning your attention to what's not working, turn it back to yourself. Let it be a chance for you to develop personally and as a parent. Lean into your strengths. And remember, as a single parent, it can feel really isolating, or even as a parent who is with a partner who has differing opinions or isn't as involved, it can just feel really isolating, especially when it comes to making big parenting decisions or having consequences for breaking the rules. It can feel really lonely. And when you have a partner there with you who can be a sounding board, a place to air your grievances and help you come to decisions on how to handle things, it can really make things feel a little bit less lonely. And I've worked with many, many parents on this exact thing. I can be that partner for you. So if you're feeling isolated as a parent, or you're feeling frustrated because you don't have someone there to talk to about these situations that you're having with your teenager, I can be that person for you. So just schedule a consultation with me. There's a link in the show notes. Reach out to me and we will talk about what coaching is all about and see if it's a good fit for you. I look forward to meeting you. And as always, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. The more you put into the show, the more hands it's going to get into other people and the more kids it will help. That's the viewpoint of it all. Really making this world a better place, one parent, one teenager at a time. And thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.